They called it the Exodus, a moment that split the age of the galaxy clean in two. No one expected the humans to actually do it. They had stood in the grand chambers of the Galactic Council, their envoys surrounded by thousands of dignitaries from 100 species. The floor shimmered under a lattice of starlight projection. At first, it seemed like another human bluff, another round of stubborn protest. But when the Earth delegation rose in perfect unison, their faces solemn and unbowed, silence fell across the chamber. A single human woman, voice clear and cold, spoke 4 words that would echo for centuries. We withdraw our consent. In the weeks that followed, debates and rumors consumed every sector. The council was the glue of civilization, the great mechanism that kept commerce flowing and conflicts contained. Humanity had only joined 3 centuries ago, but in that time they had transformed the periphery, establishing trade routes, building outposts in dead systems, and defending frail colonies that others deemed unworthy of protection. It had always been strange how quickly they adapted to every hardship. Some species called them the upstarts, others the saviors, but all agreed that humans were impossible to ignore. Now, they were gone. At first, many were relieved. Humanity's unpredictability, their refusal to submit to the old hierarchies, had unsettled the great empires. They were too fast, too independent, too hungry. The Xyrith Dominion in particular had spent decades lobbying to constrain human expansion. To them, this was a final vindication of their suspicions. The Xyrith believed that humans were simply incapable of true cooperation, that their feral instincts would inevitably drive them back into isolation. In private, Council strategists whispered darker fears. The Exodus wasn't a tantrum, it was a message. But no one dared to speak that aloud, not when centuries of doctrine insisted the Council's legitimacy was absolute. So the official line was simple: humanity would realize its mistake and return, humbled, to the fold. Far beyond the shining Council spires, however, the galaxy was already changing. The Xyrith Dominion had never hidden their ambitions. For decades, they'd tested the borders, raiding smaller polities and seeding insurgencies in resource-rich systems. They were a civilization of engineers and strategists who prized order above all else. And they believed that at last, they saw the opening they had waited for. Without humanity to shield the rimward sectors, the Xyrith began their quiet preparations. Carriers moved into staging areas under the pretext of military exercises. Fleet auxiliaries gathered supplies. Intelligence probes slipped into abandoned human sectors to map stations and assess defenses. The Xyrith High Command projected swift conquest, minimal resistance, a fast annexation of territory. After all, the humans were alone now, cut off from Council logistics, star lanes, and mutual defense treaties. Even with their technological prowess, they could not stand alone against the Dominion's industrial might. So the Xyrith told themselves. At the same time, traders and scouts noticed peculiar details along the frontier. Human outposts that should have been dilapidated were fully powered, their reactors humming steadily. Civilian traffic vanished from known routes, entire colonies seemingly evacuating in the dead of night. Automated beacons pulsed coded signals no one could decipher. And in the void, beneath the radiation wash of dying stars, long slumbering platforms came online, their signatures hidden behind a veil of sophisticated camouflage. The Xyrith dismissed these as scare tactics, remnants of humanity's theatrical diplomacy. Still, the anomalies kept accumulating. An observation drone sent to recon a supposedly deserted station returned only fragments of corrupted telemetry and a single, haunting frame, a sleek hull of unmistakably human design, bristling with weapon arrays, drifting among the wreckage. On the eve of their offensive, the Xyrith Supreme Commander gathered his advisors in the Central Command Nexus. A hologram displayed a tactical map, bright with Xyrith formations advancing across the former human sphere. Each sector was marked with a projected timetable: secure in days, pacify in weeks, next within a standard year. He studied the plan in silence, his expression composed. Yet a faint crease appeared on his brow when an aide brought him the final report from the intelligence division. It was an old, incomplete dossier compiled by council analysts decades earlier. One detail stood out, a single line buried amid technical assessments. Human fleet reserves remain unverifiable. Multiple accounts suggest Earth maintains substantial assets beyond declared inventories. The Supreme Commander frowned. How old is this? Nearly 80 cycles, the aide admitted. Update it, he ordered. But in the pit of his thoughts, a discomfort he could not name had begun to grow. Hours later, as the Dominion armadas slipped their moorings and began the slow acceleration toward the frontier, he turned once more to the silent hologram. For all its precision, it could not tell him the one thing he truly needed to know: what humanity had been building out there, in the darkness beyond council oversight. And somewhere, in the black between worlds, a human fleet waited silent, patient, unseen. The invasion began like any other Xy'rith campaign, methodical, almost elegant in its cruelty. The first wave swept across the outer settlements, encountering no real resistance. Automated defense satellites flared to life, but were systematically dismantled by precision strikes. Atmospheric garrisons, cut off from any central command, surrendered within hours. Dominion warships hung in orbit over one settlement after another, their massive hulls eclipsing suns and cast in vast shadows over empty cities. The Xy'rith broadcast their triumphs across every channel, the images of lowered human flags, proof that the Dominion was ascendant at last. To the Council, it seemed that their predictions were vindicated. Humanity had overreached. In cutting themselves off, they had forfeited the very alliances that had given them their momentary rise. Senators spoke in hushed relief that order would soon be restored. The Council dispatches made no mention of the curious reports trickling in from the frontier, reports of ships disappearing without a trace in colonies that had vanished before the Xy'rith arrived. In the first cycle, the Dominion's admirals grew bolder. The main fleet divided into 3 prongs, each tasked with seizing key star systems. The Xy'rith calculated that within another cycle, they would encircle the Sol system itself. From there, the humans would have no choice but to submit, but even then, the small things began to trouble them. It started with supply convoys. The Dominion's logistics ships traveled along meticulously scouted lanes. They were escorted by corvettes and destroyers, their routes hidden behind encryption protocols, tested across a dozen campaigns. Yet one by one, these convoys began to vanish. At first, it was assumed to be equipment failure, navigation errors, power failures, improbable but not impossible. Then the first recovered hull was found, a destroyer drifting cold in the dark, its crew missing without a single distress call. All logs had been wiped. A single symbol was burned into the inner bulkhead, a stylized human sigil no one in the Dominion recognized. The Supreme Commander ordered increased security, but the disappearances continued. A munitions convoy simply stopped responding to hails and was never seen again. A listening post at the edge of the Cygni Verge reported contact with an unidentified human vessel, then transmitted a single corrupted image and went silent forever. Xy'rith strategists pored over these incidents, convinced they were seeing only the ragged death throes of a civilization collapsing under its own arrogance. Humans, they decided, were resorting to guerrilla raids out of desperation. But still, the humans did not sue for peace. In the occupied systems, Xy'rith commanders tried to re-establish order among the civilian populations. Yet even here, the pattern of the occupation did not fit any known precedent. Entire cities had been evacuated before Dominion ships made orbit. Storehouses were empty, databanks purged, infrastructure booby-trapped or stripped to the frame. It was as though humanity had known exactly when and where the Dominion would strike and had prepared for it. In the mining settlements of Delta Thorn, Dominion officers found enormous underground hangars filled with burned wreckage. Analysis confirmed these were the remains of advanced fabrication plants, some of them capable of building entire corvettes autonomously. The destruction had been total, intentional. Not a single machine core remained for reverse engineering. When Xyrith intelligence finally decrypted a fragment of human transmissions, it contained only a brief, unnerving phrase, "You are behind schedule." The phrase spread through the Dominion ranks like a virus. Soldiers began to whisper that the humans were not merely resisting, they were executing a strategy. A plan whose scale and precision no one had anticipated. But the Supreme Commander insisted on pressing forward. Publicly, he declared that the campaign was proceeding ahead of projections. Privately, he ordered every fleet to be on constant alert. In the second cycle, Xyrith scouts advanced into the deeper sectors, the uncolonized systems humanity had claimed but never fully settled. Here, they expected to find nothing but neglected outposts. Instead, they encountered the first real resistance. It began with the loss of the Advance picket near the Perseid Drift. A flotilla of 6 light cruisers simply disappeared from sensors. The last transmission was a frantic warning about phantoms in the dark. Then came the assault on the relay station in orbit over Kepler-22. Station's automated defenses had been dormant for years, but as Dominion Marines boarded it, every system sprang to life. Heavy plasma batteries erupted from hidden housings. The Marines were incinerated in a heartbeat. The station then broadcast a brief signal to parts unknown and detonated, taking 2 Dominion ships with it. By the time the third cycle began, Xyrith analysts were forced to admit that they were no longer certain where the human frontier ended. Systems they believed abandoned were now bristling with hidden fortifications. Fleets they had counted destroyed appeared on deep scans, maneuvering with impossible coordination. In the darkness beyond the stars, human ships watched. They did not engage openly yet. Instead, they picked off stragglers, severed supply lines, and sowed confusion wherever they could. And in every captured system, Dominion officers discovered the same chilling detail, no matter how far they advanced. They found evidence that humanity had been here before them. Empty bunkers, stripped facilities, encrypted records detailing Dominion fleet movements in uncanny detail. The realization began to sink in. Slow and cold, they were not hunting humans. They were walking straight into whatever the humans had prepared. For days, the Xyrith fleets drifted through the conquered systems in a haze of mounting unease. What should have been the final triumphant march had become something else, an endless sequence of anomalies and losses that no one could fully explain. But it was in the twilight of the third cycle that everything changed. It began in the Epsilon Lyrae system, a cold place of barren planets and decaying infrastructure. Dominion intelligence had long believed the sector contained nothing of value, just abandoned mining rigs and the shell of a once thriving trade hub. When the Xyrith flotilla entered orbit, their scanners confirmed the same. No power signatures, no heat blooms, no life. The Supreme Commander ordered a garrison left behind to strip the derelict stations for salvage and moved on to the next objective. The flotilla never received further orders. Somewhere between the moons of Epsilon Lyrae 4, the hidden threshold of humanity's patience finally gave way. It began with the blackout. One moment, the Xyrith ships were exchanging routine updates. The next, every channel dissolved into static. Backup frequencies failed. Quantum relays devices thought impervious to jamming fell silent. On every bridge, alarms screeched in. Discordant chorus, before any response could be organized. The darkness itself moved. A shape emerged from behind the third moon, a colossal wedge of black metal, edges wreathed in cold blue light. Its profile was unmistakably human, yet nothing in the Dominion's vast archives matched it. It drifted forward on silent thrusters, and for an instant, every Xyrith officer dared to hope it was a derelict. Then the ship spoke. A voice, synthetic and perfectly calm, echoed across every Dominion deck. Ghost Fleet designation, Midnight. Spear, Operation Leviathan is now active. In the next heartbeat, the Midnight Spear opened fire. Beams of coherent X-ray radiation slashed across space, cutting clean through hull and armor alike. An entire Xy'rith destroyer vanished in a single flare of plasma. The flotilla turned in panic, struggling to form a counteroffensive, but their targeting sensors were blind. From the darkness beyond the spear, more shapes appeared. 10, 20, 100. Human vessels, their hulls painted black as void, so cold their drives barely registered on thermal scans. Each of them armed with weapons the Dominion's best strategists had never seen deployed. Every Dominion commander had been trained to expect the first contact protocols, negotiations, hails, and exchange of threats or demands. But the Ghost Fleet did not negotiate. They executed. Within minutes, the flotilla disintegrated under pinpoint bombardment. Dominion gunships that managed to launch counterstrikes found their own targeting systems, turned against them hijacked by algorithms embedded in the local comm network. Two cruisers collided at full burn, torn apart by kinetic forces before their crews understood what had happened. In the aftermath, as the last wrecks cooled in the vacuum, the Ghost Fleet withdrew into the darkness. Only a single Dominion frigate survived crippled, its engines fused. Before it was left behind, the Midnight Spear transmitted a short message. "This sector is under quarantine. Depart immediately." The recording was rushed to the Supreme Commander's flagship. He played it 3 times in silence, listening to the mechanical voice that spoke with the finality of a sealed grave. When he finally looked up, his expression was ashen. "They had these ships all along," he whispered. "They let us think." They were unprepared. His advisors shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to meet his gaze. "They built them in secret," someone muttered. "Maybe even during the Council years." The Supreme Commander slammed his fist against the console, his composure fracturing. "We underestimated them. We believed they needed our networks, our trade, our treaties. But they were preparing for this, planning for it." The realization swept through the Dominion like a virus, sudden, undeniable, lethal to every comforting illusion they had clung to. It was not merely the existence of the Ghost Fleet that shook them. It was the implication behind it that humanity had never intended to rely on the Council's protection, that every alliance had been temporary, every negotiation a convenient fiction. And while the Dominion boasted of conquest, the humans had been building the means to wage war on a scale no one had imagined. From that moment, the campaign changed. Dominion forces slowed their advance, consolidating garrisons and pulling back from exposed positions. Convoys moved under heavy escort, fearful of unseen watchers. Every Xy'rith commander was ordered to review intelligence reports for any sign of the Ghost Fleet's movements. Yet the humans did not press their advantage openly. Instead, they let the Dominion stew in uncertainty, never knowing where or when the next blow would fall. On distant relay stations, Council observers recorded the shifts in Dominion strategy and began to understand that this was not a simple resource war. It was a reckoning. The Supreme Commander called an emergency conclave, transmitting a single directive to every fleet. "We have made a grave mistake. Prepare for total resistance." The Dominion tried to adapt. They changed encryption protocols hourly, rerouted convoys through random vectors, deployed stealth scouts in formation with fleet movements. The Xy'rith High Command even issued an unprecedented order. Every senior officer was to undergo a rapid rotation, breaking predictable leadership patterns. They flooded contested sectors with drones and sensor webs, convinced they could choke out the shadows. It didn't work. Humanity wasn't fighting like a standard military. They weren't fighting for territory. They were waging a psychological war, surgical, relentless, and perfectly patient. Within a month of the Epsilon Lyrae massacre, 3 more Dominion flotillas went missing. Entire fleets reduced to debris fields or wiped from reality with surgical precision. The Ghost Fleet, now the most feared name in the galaxy, never left survivors. They left symbols, messages, data-locked coordinates that resolved into cold warnings or ghostly recordings of Xyrath ships, tearing themselves apart from within. One such message showed a Dominion battleship, silent and empty, its crew long dead, each one apparently having turned on each other in a panic that no one could explain. The only voice captured by internal comms was calm, male, unmistakably human. "We watched you come. We let you. We wanted to see if you'd remember what fear tasted like." Then static. The Xyrath morale began to crack. Some commanders refused to advance. Others issued kill orders on any unknown signal, civilian, military, or otherwise. And then came the worst blow yet. The attack on Sector Node, AEGIR-9. AEGIR-9 had been the Dominion's central command relay for all rimward operations, heavily fortified. AI defended, wrapped in layers of shielding and drone networks. It should have been untouchable. But humans weren't interested in brute force. They infected the system. The first sign was a minor sensor glitch. Then a maintenance droid on the central hub began accessing off-limits data nodes. Firewalls activated, but by then it was too late. One by one, Dominion subsystems went dark. Drones turned on their own engineers. Defense turrets misfired into their own launch bays. By the time the system AI tried to isolate the threat, its logic architecture had already been rewritten by a virus with a name Leviathan. Within 43 minutes, AEGIR-9 detonated. Not from enemy fire but from its own internal reactors, triggered in a perfectly timed chain reaction. The resulting explosion crippled 3 fleets in the surrounding sector. The humans hadn't even needed to show up. That was the worst part. The Dominion, masters of battlefield supremacy, were being outmaneuvered by ghosts. Some Xyrath officers theorized that humans had developed AI war minds far beyond council regulation, fully autonomous, self-replicating, capable of multidimensional strategy. Others believed in darker myths, that Earth had never stopped experimenting with biological warfare, and that something post-human now lurked in the deep void, wearing humanity's face. Whatever the truth, the effect was undeniable. Fear took hold. In the 4th cycle, Xyrath soldiers began abandoning forward posts. The High Command issued executions for desertion. It didn't matter. The fear had become cultural, now an infection no doctrine could contain. Worse still, humans began broadcasting intercepted Dominion comms back into their own ranks, edited and spliced into haunting montages. One looped message became infamous. Across the Xyrath fleets, a recording of a Xyrath captain sobbing before his ship decompressed, paired with a whispered phrase layered beneath it. "You started a war with ghosts. Now the dead are answering." The Supreme Commander doubled defenses around Sol, convinced the humans would make a last stand there. But nothing moved in that sector, nothing visible anyway. No fleets, no beacons, no transmissions. Just silence. Instead, the humans escalated in other ways. They began activating relics. Old council records had long suggested that humanity had discovered or built immense, ancient structures during their rapid frontier expansion. Deep space arcs, gravity-lensed weapon arrays, planet crackers still half-assembled. The council had tried to impose limitations. Humanity had nodded politely and kept building. Now, those forgotten megastructures began to flicker online. In the ruins of Trappist Haven, a solar forge reignited, pulsing beams of antimatter energy across space as it refined unknown materials. Near Sirius, a Dyson-scarred relay grid blinked to life, broadcasting encrypted telemetry to coordinates in empty space coordinates. Dominion ships soon learned to avoid, and across dozens of sectors, vast spheres of wreckage began to drift into coherent patterns forming the edges of something far larger, the Iron Curtain, a boundary, both literal and symbolic, that marked reclaimed human space. By the end of the fourth cycle, the map of the war had reversed. The Xy'rith weren't surrounding humanity, that they were being encircled. In one final gesture of defiance, a Dominion general staged a mass assault against the asteroid belt of the Proxima Line, once a mining zone, now fortified with what he assumed were minor resistance cells. He committed 8 carriers, 17 cruisers, and a planet-record dreadnought. He broadcast his attack across all frequencies, declaring the humans broken and cornered. The battle lasted 6 minutes. When the dust cleared, only one human vessel had been visible, a retrofitted colony hauler, repurposed as a decoy. The rest of the defense had been automated mine clouds, sentry drones, and orbital railguns with targeting speeds that surpassed Xy'rith, a response time by a full second. That battle was the final straw. In the war rooms of the Dominion, silence fell. The old maps were wrong. The enemy was not fractured. Humanity had never left. They had only stepped back so the trap could close. Asterisk on the far edge of the Dominion's front line. An uneasy quiet settled across the embattled fleets. The silence was not peace, only the pause before something no one could name. Within the High Command, the Supreme Commander no longer pretended this was a campaign of liberation or reclamation. The myth had shattered. His people were cornered, in hostile space, watched by unseen eyes. The next blow, he knew, would not be another raid or skirmish. It would be final. And then, in the 7th cycle, the second twist came. It was not a human fleet that emerged from the dark, but something older, something the Dominion's own ancestors had banished from the record. It happened in the Vega Expanse, where the Dominion had established a fallback bastion. Thousands of ships, a fortress ring, and a fleet yard larger than any other in known space. There, at least, they believed themselves safe. The first warning came as a ripple across the local gravity wells, a pulse so powerful that every sensor array in the system stuttered into static. For 9 terrifying minutes, not a single Xy'rith ship could confirm its own position. When the sensors finally resolved, they showed a shape unlike anything in the Dominion archives. An angular hull miles long, rotating slowly, its flanks alive with ghostly blue flickers. It was not of human design, yet the transmission that followed came on human frequencies. A single phrase, spoken in a language older than Galactic Standard, translated in real time by the Dominion's panlingual algorithms. "This is the Black Accord. We are returned." Panic swept the bastion. Long-dead legends erupted from the vaults of Forbidden's history. The Black Accord, the vanished precursors who had once burned a swath across 1,000 systems before their sudden disappearance. Scholars had speculated for centuries that they had gone to die or sleep or transform into something unknowable, but humanity had found them. And woken them. The Black Accord ship pivoted toward the Dominion's fleet yard. All at once, every Dominion battleship lost power. Reactors shut down as though a divine hand had severed their connection to the universe itself. One by one, the Dominion's ships began to drift. It wasn't a weapon, at least, not as the Xy'rith understood weapons. It was a negation, a proof that the enemy could erase their presence from the field. With a thought. As the Dominion's engineers screamed into their comms, begging for power restoration, the second wave arrived. A human fleet slipped into the system, 50 ships. Their hulls a patchwork of Terran design and the same abyssal alloy that gleamed across the Black Accord behemoth. A fusion of technology so advanced it looked like sorcery. From the command deck of the Midnight Spear, Admiral Tamsin Holt watched the paralyzed Dominion armada. She had not spoken publicly in all the war, content to let the Dominion think this was some automated vendetta. But this moment deserved witness. Her voice rang across every channel, carried into every Dominion ship. Your arrogance was predictable. You believed our absence meant weakness, that our silence meant surrender. But you never understood what we left behind when we walked away. In the Supreme Commander's flagship, horror settled in the crew's bones. Holt continued. When we severed ties with the Council, you called us mad. You whispered that we would perish alone in the dark. What you failed to see was that we never intended to be alone. The Black Accord vessel pulsed again, and the Dominion fleet yard began to break apart, matter unweaving, as though space itself had become liquid. We reached out, she said, her voice soft and inexorable, to the ones who understood what you would never grasp, that the galaxy does not belong to the loudest empires or the oldest archives. It belongs to those who will not bow. The Dominion fleet, still paralyzed, watched in helpless dread as an entire planetary defense grid disintegrated without a single explosion. You have mistaken our restraint for limitation, Holt said. You have mistaken our silence for fear. You have mistaken our patience for fragility. Her gaze, cold and bright on every screen, bored into the hearts of her enemies. You have mistaken us. That will be your epitaph. In the control pits of the Supreme Commander's flagship, officers fell to their knees. All pretense of strategy evaporated. They understood now why the humans had not pressed their advantage earlier. They had been waiting for this moment, the return of an ally so ancient and powerful that the Dominion's entire military might was a child's game in comparison. As the first Xyrath ships began to power down, permanently reactors locked by. Codes older than their civilization, Admiral Holt spoke one last time. Withdraw, while you still can. And with that, the Midnight Spear turned away. It did not pursue. It did not fire another shot. It simply left them drifting among the debris of their own hubris. In the stunned quiet that followed, the Supreme Commander finally saw the truth that had eluded him for so long. This was never a war humanity believed. They might lose. It was a reckoning they knew they could not fail. And in that instant, he understood that the Dominion had triggered a war it could never hope to survive. In the final cycle of the campaign, the Dominion fleets gathered in the only place they still believed they could make a stand, the Orion Spur, a fortress sector. 1,000 warships, all that remained of their dreams of conquest. The Supreme Commander stood on the observation deck of the dreadnought Imperator's crown, watching the holographic display flicker with movement. Dominion squadrons aligning in dense formations, carriers launching drone swarms that looked like metallic clouds. The Xyrath had staked everything on this last defense. If they could hold this line, perhaps they could negotiate terms. Perhaps they could save their empire from total collapse. He did not believe it himself, but he knew no other path. When the first human ships emerged from warp, they came not in waves or probing strikes, but as a single vast front. A fleet unlike anything recorded in Council history, Ghost Fleet battle groups, Black Accord dreadnoughts, and behind them, titanic constructs that seemed to have been built around entire planetoids. In that moment, the last Dominion commanders finally grasped the true scale of humanity's preparation. The humans had not only built weapons, they had built an entire infrastructure of war. Hidden in the dark, perfected in the centuries they had been dismissed as outcasts. And now, they unleashed it all. The opening salvo came from the Midnight Spear. It fired a beam that rippled through local space, like a crack in glass warping gravity itself. The Dominion's forward picket line simply ceased to exist. No wreckage, no distress signals. Just empty space where 100 ships had been. Panic spread through the Xyrath formations. Thousands of Dominion drones surged forward in a tide of glittering death, hoping to blunt the advance. But the Ghost Fleet was ready. Swarms of autonomous counter-drones deployed in perfect silence, weaving through the Dominion formations. The Orion Spur became a latticework of combat. Millions of tiny engines flaring in the dark as machines ripped each other apart in choreographed fury. Amid the chaos, the Black Accord dreadnought advanced. It did not fire a conventional weapon. Instead, It opened a breach in local spacetime, a shimmering curtain of darkness that drew entire Dominion squadrons inward, folding them into an impossible geometry. The Imperator's crown trembled as its sensors attempted to render what they were witnessing, and failed. The Supreme Commander's officers turned to him, waiting for orders, but there was no order that could meet this moment. The humans advanced in perfect silence, their formations as disciplined as they were terrifying. Every Dominion warship that managed to lock targeting solutions found its weapons, failing to respond or worse rerouted against its own fleet. On the starboard flank, a formation of Xy'rith cruisers regrouped and launched a last-ditch missile. Barrage. It never reached its target. An array of human railguns fired in sequence, detonating the barrage mid-flight in a storm of blue fire. Through that expanding debris field, the human heavy cruisers moved with unhurried precision, methodically cutting apart every enemy ship. No mercy. No negotiation. No doubt. The Supreme Commander gripped the rail as impact tremors rolled through. The Imperator's crown. He thought of all the warnings, ignored of the Council envoys who had begged him not to provoke Earth, of the historians who had whispered that humans had learned the art of annihilation better than any species alive. He understood it now. They were not fighting an empire. They were fighting a species that had chosen, long ago, never to be conquered. Again, on the central display, the Midnight Spear pivoted to face the flagship. Its weapons arrays glowed a cold, perfect blue. "Sir," a sensor officer croaked, voice breaking. They're targeting us." The Supreme Commander looked up, meeting the holographic gaze of Admiral Holt as her image resolved across every Dominion screen. Her voice was as calm as the grave. "This is your final warning. Leave our frontier. Leave this galaxy's edge. Do not return." He swallowed, feeling the last of his pride shrivel into ash. "You would have done the same," he said hoarsely. Admiral Holt studied him in silence. "Yes," she said at last. "That is why we will never kneel." Her image vanished. A heartbeat later, the Midnight Spear fired. The lance of energy struck the Imperator's crown amidships. The flagship cracked like brittle stone. In the same instant, dozens of Dominion ships erupted in sympathetic detonations, each targeted with lethal precision. Across the Orion Spur, Xy'rith formations dissolved. Some fled into deep space, scattering into exile. Others surrendered, transmitting frantic pleas for mercy to any human frequency. But the Ghost Fleet did not pursue them. They simply stopped. The battle was over as suddenly as it had begun. The human formations drifted in the dark, engines idle, weapons cold, watching. The Supreme Commander, pinned beneath a shattered bulkhead on what remained of his bridge, managed to lift his gaze one final time. Through the cracked viewport, he saw the Midnight Spear gliding past, its hull lit with 1,000 signal lights, each a testament to centuries of quiet, unbreakable resolve. In that moment, he understood what all the warnings had tried to say. You do not invade a world that has tasted extinction, because those who have survived it are already something more than conquerors. They are the reckoning itself. The Orion Spur lay silent. Debris fields drifted in the void like frozen graveyards, the shattered hulks of 1,000 Dominion warships testifying to a lesson too late learned. In the aftermath, the Ghost Fleet did not press further. No grand conquest followed. No human banners planted on broken Xy'rith worlds. The war, for all its cataclysmic scale, ended not in occupation, but in absence. The Dominion survivors regrouped in exile, nursing wounds deeper than any censor log could record. Their empire had not only been defeated, it had been revealed. As fragile, arrogant, and blind. On the hidden observation decks of the human flagship Midnight Spear, Admiral Holt walked alone, her boots echoing across polished alloy floors. Around her, displays scrolled endless casualty reports, intercepted transmissions, and evacuation notices. She paused before a window and looked out over the dark horizon. The Black Accord dreadnought still hung there, a silhouette, so ancient it felt more like a memory than a ship. Its presence had shifted the war from a struggle of fleets to something elemental. A reminder to every watching species, humanity was never truly alone. For generations, the Council had whispered that the humans were too volatile, too independent, too unwilling to submit to the galactic consensus. And in the end, every one of those warnings had proven true. The Dominion's defeated remnants drifted on the far side of the wreckage, no longer able to mount resistance. Transmissions of surrender echoed across channels in a dozen dialects. Some pleaded for clemency, others for understanding, and still others for an end swift and final. Humanity gave none of them the satisfaction of a reply. At last, the Supreme Commander's voice came across the general frequency. His tone was hoarse, every syllable strained by pain and resignation. To the Terran Alliance, if that is what you still call yourselves, I acknowledge total defeat. This was never a war we could win. Holt did not answer immediately. She watched the Dominion's tattered fleet rotate slowly in the dark, their lights blinking in mournful synchronY. Then she keyed her transmission. Your council decreed we were unfit to govern ourselves, she said, her voice quiet but carrying. You told us we were children with matches, destined to burn down all we touched. She drew a slow breath. You were correct about one thing. Fire is in our nature. The Supreme Commander's image flickered, his face drawn and defeated. You mean to leave us here? We mean to leave you alive, Holt replied, so your people will remember. His gaze dropped. Then there is nothing more to say. Holt inclined her head. There never was. The channel closed. From the command deck, the final order went out to all human vessels. Engines ignited in unison, and with stately inevitability, the Ghost Fleet began its withdrawal. The Black Accord ship pivoted in silent escort, its gravity shadow trailing behind it like the wake of a Leviathan. No fanfare, no proclamations, only the quiet, undeniable proof that humanity had reclaimed the respect they were once denied. Long after the last human ship faded into jump space, the Dominion, survivors remained frozen in their shattered ranks. None dared follow. None dared even broadcast a pursuit order. In the cycles that followed, stories spread, whispers traded in dimly lit council chambers and frontier taverns alike. Some claimed the humans had forged a pact with something beyond understanding. Others swore the Ghost Fleet was an illusion, that no species could possibly wield so much power and simply leave. But those who had faced them knew better. They had seen the cold determination behind every human maneuver, the precision of every strike, the discipline that had turned entire Dominion armadas into drifting husks, and above all, they had seen the unbreakable unity that made humanity's triumph inevitable. When the Council finally reconvened to debate the aftermath, the atmosphere was unlike any gathering in living memory. No one dared to speak of sanctions or reclamation. No one suggested another expedition to Sol. The word containment had lost all meaning. Because now they knew the truth. Humanity had not simply survived their isolation. They had transcended it. They had become something the galaxy could no longer afford to provoke. On Earth, far from the wreckage and the whispers, ordinary people looked up into familiar stars, many never knowing how close their world had come to annihilation. Children played under skyways, elders tended old gardens, and artisans rebuilt cities that had once prepared for extinction. Thought they were the reason the Terran fleets had fought with such quiet ferocity. The reason no surrender had been offered. Because the memory of nearly losing everything had etched one final truth into the human spirit. Never again. In time, the Dominion rebuilt smaller, humbler, and far more cautious. Generations would pass before they dared expand into human-claimed space, and when they did, their envoys came not as conquerors, but as supplicants. Those who listened closely to the Dominion's refugee fleets swore they carried a final warning. Passed from ship to ship, system to system. It was not a threat. but a simple statement. Do not mistake humanity's patience for weakness. Do not mistake their silence for surrender. And above all, never let them walk away. Because when they return, nothing you love will remain.